myself and Tom. Tom was a small horse, powerful body, 15 hands 3, but the finest horse and the strongest horse in the whole county. He'd pull Budweiser's horses all over the place. And there would be 3 times his weight, 4 times his weight. So anyway, he was a very, very strong horse, and but he was well fed, and I was the one who was feeding them. And when I didn't, I made sure they were fed. Good hay, first crop or second crop hay. Always crushed oats. And if I didn't have crushed oats, I put a double handful of bran through the whole oats. And by doing that, he had to chew every bit of oats you gave him. But like in the ordinary course, if you didn't put a bran through it, they swallow a lot of it, and they don't get the full benefit of it. So that's the reason it pays to crush the oats for the horses, so that they get the full good of it. And then coming into the winter, in about starting about the 1st of November or so, you'd start giving them 2 turnips every night. Each horse got 2 turnips. For all you go around 8 o'clock and give each horse 2 turnips. Now, when you would bed Tom horse down, you'd bring the straw in his bed right down to the end of the stall, the partition between himself and Peggy. And when you'd go in the morning, you'd see Peggy's bed was where you put it the night before. But you'd see that Tom's bed had been kicked down and pawed down, away down from the manger. Because when Tom laid down, he left his head flat on the ground. Other horses, they sleep with their heads up, but not Tom. He fully relaxed himself, and he would just flatten himself out, and that's the reason he kicked his bed back down, so he'd have something under him down there on the stones. And that's the way Tom always slept, even out in the field in the summertime, when the horses would be grazing, and they'd just lay down there in the sun, and they'd fall asleep, and they'd be out there with their heads sticking up. But Tom always laid with his head flat down and fully relaxed. He was a horse I could never catch out in the field unless I had a bit of grass or a grain of oats or something. But to catch Tom without something in your hand for him, he would let you walk right up to him. You would talk to him, you'd walk right up to him, and you'd put your hand up to put on his bob. And by the time your hand got up to where his bob was, it was his tail that was there, not his bob. Because Tom would do a beautiful spin around, and here was your hand beside his tail. And of course you don't catch a horse that way. But the only one who could catch Tom was Tommy Joe. When he was a small little lad, he rambled down, and he got down where the horses were. And he was only a little bit of a thing just after he got out of his crawling stage walking. And he'd go over to Tom, and Tom would stand there, and he'd keep his head down, and Tommy would catch his bob. And he would never do a thing to the child. Several times Tom saved Tommy Joe's life. I saw him do it. But, and he was I saw one time the horses were coming up from the mill, and I stood at the wicket gate like that when they were coming up to turn them into the yard, and I didn't realise that Tommy Joe was crawling at the time, and the back door got open or some way, and he got out. And of course, Tom was always the first to come up because he was a terrific galloper. He could jump too. But Tom raced in the wicket gate. He'd lower his head going in the wicket gate because there was a top to it. And as soon as he got in 4 yards or so inside the gate, here was Tommy Joe right in his tracks. And all the horses were coming up. Some of them were young. And Tom Horse just spread his 4 feet, dug them into the cobblestones, and he stood exactly the way he was over the kid. Some of the other horses shot in the gate. They all had to run around Tom because he stood there. And I saw that happen. And when all the horses had gone up to the horse stable up at the end of the yard, and Tom walked sideways away from the child, he went up himself. I thought that was something. So, and he was, one day I had Tom onto the cart, and I'd given Tommy Joe a few rides in the cart, and he loved to get a ride in the cart. He was a little lad. And this day I was doing something with Tom, and he was under the cart, and I took him into the yard, and I put him standing in the hay shed. In the last span, there was no hay in it at the time. And I went to get whatever I wanted to get, slash hook or whatever it was that I needed. And while I was looking for the thing anyway, Tommy Joe crawled out of the house. And he come to the wheel of the cart. And because he had been in the cart a few times, he was going to climb up and get in himself. Now he was only in the crawling stage. So poor Tommy, he crawled up, and he was doing fine until he got to where the spokes started to stick up almost straight, and then he couldn't get any grip, and he was stuck there. And I didn't know it. So I come down the yard, and I took Tom by the head and I says, "Come on, Tom," like that. And Tom wouldn't move. So I said, "Oh, come on, Tom." I said, "Come on," like that. Tom wouldn't budge. So then I said, "Come on, will you?" Tom wouldn't move. And just at this time, my grandmother happened to be up the country at the time, and she happened to come and look out the back door, and didn't she see the child up in the wheel? And she let a scream out of her and fainted. So I ran around and here was Tommy Joe up on the wheel. So I went over and I picked him up, and I brought him around to Tom. Let Tom smell him and see him. Tom wouldn't move because he knew the child was on the wheel. Whatever little nudge Tom was to knock out the wheel and he was climbing up or whatever it was, but the horse knew that the child was on the wheel. And if he had moved, he'd have whipped the child around and he would fall down in front of the wheel. The cart weighed 900 weight. So I might have killed my own godchild and my cousin. So I took Tommy then in and I gave him to my grandmother, and I went out and I says to Tom, I thanked him and I petted him and I praised him and I put pulled up his mouth like that, and I kissed him on the puss. And I didn't care who saw me do it. Because if the horse was as dopey as I was, Tommy Joe would be dead. But the horse was smart, and he knew the child was there, and he wouldn't come when I asked him. And that's what saved Tommy Joe.